All right, let's talk about neural networks. I know it sounds super complicated, but today we're going to peel back all those layers. We're going to find out how this amazing idea was built, literally from a single cell up. So let's just start with the most basic question, right? If you, yes, you, had to teach a machine how to think, where would you even start? Well, it turns out the answer isn't in some futuristic computer lab. It's inside all of us. The very first pioneers of AI looked at the original blueprint for intelligence, nature. And what's nature's blueprint for thinking? It's the most powerful computer we know of, the neuron. Yep, that one little brain cell, that's what became the model for a thinking machine. And you know what's crazy? The structure is actually pretty simple. You've got these dendrites, think of them like little antennas, grabbing signals from all over. Then those signals shoot over to the soma, the cell body. That's the processor. It basically adds up all the signals it gets and asks, is this important? If the answer is yes, bam, it fires its own signal down the axon to the next set of neurons. So it's just receive, process, transmit. Super elegant, right? Okay, so with that biological blueprint, researchers back in the 40s thought, hey, can we build that? Can we make a digital version? And their first crack at it was a huge deal. So back in 1943, these two guys, McCullough and Pitts, they built this simple little circuit. And it did exactly what the neuron does, but with electricity. It took a bunch of on or off signals, ones and zeros. It added them all up. And if the total was bigger than some number they'd set, a threshold, it would fire its own on signal. That's it. So simple, but absolutely brilliant for a first step. So you can see exactly how they mapped it. The dendrites, those are the inputs, the ones and zeros. The soma, the cell body, that's just the part that adds everything up and checks it against the threshold. And the axon, well, that's the final output, another 1 or 0. It's a perfect copy, just in code instead of cells. But there was a huge problem. This thing was hardwired. The connections, that threshold number, it was all fixed. It was set in stone. So it could do the math, sure, but it couldn't learn. It couldn't change. And that was the whole point, right? To be smart, a machine has to learn from its mistakes, not just follow the same rigid instructions forever. So yeah, that inability to learn, that was the big roadblock. And the solution that came along about a decade and a half later, that's what really lit the fuse for modern AI. So in 1957, a guy named Frank Rosenblatt comes along with this thing called the perceptron. And it has two new game-changing ideas. First, weights. This lets the neuron say, hey, this input is way more important than that one. And second, bias. Think of bias as a little thumb on the scale. It can make the neuron either more eager to fire or more hesitant, no matter what the inputs are. So now you have these two little dials, weights and bias, that the neuron can actually tune. And that is the key to learning. Okay, so tuning these dials, what does that even mean? How does that equal learning? Let's walk through a super simple example and you'll see exactly how it works. All right, we're going to teach our little perceptron a simple logic rule called AND. It's dead simple. You only get a 1 out if both inputs are 1. If not, you get a 0. You and I can see that pattern in a second. But our little machine, it's starting from scratch. It knows nothing. So we show it the first few examples and hey, it gets them right, probably just by luck. But then we get to the last one. We give it a 1 and a 1. And based on its totally random starting point, it guesses 0. Wrong. We know the answer is 1. It just made a mistake. And this is where the magic happens. The perceptron looks at its mistake. It sees it guessed 0 when it should have been 1. It calculates that error. Then it says, okay, let me just tweak those little weight and buy styles a tiny bit. Just nudge them in a direction so that next time I'm a little closer to the right answer. And then it does it again and again and again. Thousands of times, each mistake making it a tiny bit smarter. So a single one of these things, a single perceptron, can learn a simple pattern. Pretty cool. But that's not the end of the story. The real power, the truly mind-blowing stuff, happens when you start linking them together, just like in our brains. Let's take a look at a trickier problem. It's called XOR, or exclusive OR. The rule here is you get a 1 if the inputs are different, and a 0 if they're the same. Now, if you actually plot this data out, you see something weird. The two groups, the correct answers, they're not in nice, neat little clumps. Now, here's the thing about our single perceptron. All it can learn to do is draw one straight line to separate the yes answers from the no answers. So look at this. How on earth can you draw a single straight line to separate the blue from the orange here? The answer? You can't. It's impossible. A single neuron, no matter how clever it gets with its weights and bias, just can't solve this. It hits a wall. But what if you don't just use one? What if you use a whole network of them? This is the multi-layer perceptron, the MLP. You line them up in layers. You've got an input layer that just takes in the data, then one or more hidden layers in the middle doing the heavy lifting, and finally, an output layer that spits out the final answer. The first layer might learn to draw simple lines, but the next layer can combine those lines to create more complex shapes. And by working together, they can absolutely solve a problem like XR. Now, because you have all these layers and connections, people often call neural networks black boxes, right? It feels like you put data in one end, and magic happens inside, and an answer comes out the other. But as we've just seen together, it's not a black box. It's not magic. At its very core, it's just that one simple idea we started with, copied from a single brain cell. An idea that learns from its mistakes by tweaking a few dials. And when you stack that idea, layer on layer, it grows into something that starts to look a lot like a brain. It's an incredible journey, from a single cell to a thinking machine.